Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see you again for this edition of Ecclesiastical Law Bite Size. I'm the Venerable Moira Astin. I'm the Archdeacon of Reigate, and being slightly different from our first three, where it was either me or Russell being interviewed by the other, we've now started to invite other people to the hot seat. And this evening, the hot seat is going to be sat in by Jon Baldwin. Would you like to introduce yourself, Jon?
Thanks, Moira. So I'm a diocesan registrar, and if you tuned into the previous episode about who's who, you'll know that that's essentially the legal advisor to a diocese, and I work for the Diocese of Southwark, where Moira serves, and the Diocese of St Albans.
I'd like to remind you of our format, which is about 15 to 20 minutes of me interviewing Jon around the theme. At the end of that, recording will be switched off, and then we'll be open for some questions. I'd like to point out that anything Jon says is about teaching and introducing people into greater depth of ecclesiastical law. He's not giving specific legal advice on anything, either in this initial discussion nor in any questions afterwards. So do bear that in mind. He won't be telling you in detail exactly how to deal with an issue in your own PCC, but we'll be open to more general questions than that. So, Jon, title is What is a PCC? So, what is a PCC?
Well, firstly, PCC stands for Parochial Church Council. And as the name suggests, PCCs are really intrinsically linked to the parish system. So it's quite simple. Every parish has a PCC. And that means these days, ministers who look after multiple parishes will often, therefore, work with multiple PCCs. PCCs have been around just over 100 years. They had their 100th birthday a couple of years ago. And essentially, every PCC is a corporate body and a charity. And I suppose the way to think about them is they are essentially the administrative and the financial headquarters of a parish, and they are the vehicle through which the mission of the Church of England in the parish is carried out. So, for example, PCCs will manage the income and expenditure of a parish. They'll bank donations made and decide how that money should be spent. And at their heart, really, they're a way, one of the ways for lay parishioners, lay members of the church, to join with the minister in the running of the church. And in that sense, they could also be thought of as the most local part of the synodical structure of the Church of England. So they're a way in which people can gather together and talk about how the church's mission should be promoted in their area. And they take part in the synodical government of the church because they can send proposals up to deaneries and diocesan synods, and in turn they may be asked to debate matters referred to them by those synods. So they're both an administrative body and an ability for people to come together and discuss and debate how the mission of the church can be carried out.
So that's broadly what the PCC is, but what do they actually do apart from have rows with each other?
Well, I think the most important thing is that to a large extent, that's actually up to the PCC, because the Church of England is made up of lots of quite autonomous bodies, and PCCs are at their heart autonomous charities, and the members of the PCC are charity trustees, and they're charged with making decisions in the best interest of the PCC and in the best interest of its object, which is progressing the mission of the Church of England. So one answer to your question is that it's really up to them to decide what the best way is to meet those objects. Now, as I said, the principal function of a PCC is to work with the minister, to cooperate with the minister in promoting in the parish the whole mission of the Church of England. And we use 4 words to describe that mission: pastoral, evangelistic, social, and ecumenical. And all of those are together describe the mission of the Church of England, and how those activities work in practice is for each PCC to determine, and will vary greatly from place to place based on context and resources and other matters. PCCs, when they were founded, they inherited lots of functions that in the past belonged to the church wardens, or an older body known as the vestry. And one of the key ones is the insurance and maintenance of the church and its contents, and the churchyard, if it is one. They also have some powers mentioned in the canons. So, for example, the PCC is involved in decisions about what forms of service should be used, how ministers are vested, how daily prayer should be held in the parish, the appointment and removal of music directors and organists, and the entry into ecumenical projects. And more generally, the ministers also required to consult with the PCC on matters which are felt to be of general concern and importance. They also play a role in the appointment of their incumbent, because they choose 2 members to act as their representative, and those representatives have to agree with the choice of incumbent. They decide whether the parish needs to apply for extended episcopal care, and they're consulted whenever pastoral reorganisation proposals are being considered.
I guess I would like to add to that, which is to do with safeguarding. That because they're trustees of a charity that works with, sometimes with children, but I think pretty much every Church of England I know has vulnerable adults in it, the PCC have an important role in ensuring that everything that happens within and for the church is done with appropriate care to safeguarding.
That's right.
Sorry, carry on.
These are one of the bodies that have to follow safeguarding guidance, so they're specifically mentioned as a sort of duty holder in that regard. The parish safeguarding handbook talks about their function, and one of their functions is to appoint somebody to be a parish safeguarding officer, to take the lead on implementation of safeguarding guidance in the parish.
And so because of that, all PCC members should have safeguarding training appropriate for being a trustee.
Yes,
so
that's right.
It doesn't have to be the in-depth that practitioners may have, but there has to be some safeguarding training, because they're all trustees of a charity that deals with those sort of things. Anyhow, as an archdeacon, I have to chip that in. So, John, who serves on a PCC?
Well, starting in the middle, the parish priest is the chair of the PCC. And that's, I suppose, slightly anomalous in modern corporate governance best practice, you might say, which these days in many charities would tend to favour a non-executive chair. It also surprises people, I think, if the concept of a PCC they have in their minds is based on Vicar of Dibley, which had a different chair. But the parish priest is the chair of the PCC. And there are other members who serve ex officio. So that includes other clergy who are licensed to serve in the parish, the church wardens, sometimes lay readers as well. People also are ex officio members of their PCC if they're a member of a higher synodical tier. So if they're a member of the deanery synod, the diocesan synod, or the general synod, and that parish is their base, then they'll also join the PCC of that parish. The PCC can also co-opt a modest number of members, but the main mechanism by which people come to serve on a PCC is by standing for election at the annual parochial church meeting, which, as the name suggests, is held once a year and is a little bit like an AGM for a PCC. The number is set by law depending on the size of the parish, and that's determined, as we'll learn next time, by the size of the electoral roll. And there's always a lay majority on PCCs.
So, the PCC is the committee for the local Anglican church. So does it own the church? Or does it own other property?
Yeah, so PCCs do not own the actual church itself, So as I said earlier, they're responsible for ensuring and maintaining it, but they don't own the church or indeed the parsonage house, because those are benefice property rather than parish property. So they actually belong to the incumbent. PCCs might own other property, such as church halls, maybe housing for other clergy, investment property. They also own the donations made during services. And usually, one would hope that the PCC is the recipient of other regular giving, such as standing orders. I think it's worth saying PCCs vary widely in their wealth. Some have large historic reserves from historic legacies and trusts, and others very much live on the breadline. And it's worth, I suppose, mentioning that PCCs are also really the gateway to much of the income that the wider church earns. And by far the biggest component of diocesan income comes from donations made by PCCs. And that's known by different names of different dioceses, but it's often called parish share or similar. And although PCCs don't pay directly for the incumbent's stipend, they are asked to contribute to the diocese for these costs. And the way that parish share scheme works is that there'll be a high degree of cross-subsidy between PCCs through those schemes, which allows, I suppose, wealthier areas, whether that's of a high-income area or an area of historic wealth, perhaps to support those who are not so fortunate. Last thing I mentioned is PCCs are not actually permitted to hold land or some trust property directly. So that sort of property is held on trust for them by the diocesan authority, which is usually the Diocesan Board of Finance. And although that type of property is under the management of PCCs, that does allow a degree of oversight by the diocese for major transactions such as sales and leases.
So the PCC is the beneficial owner.
That's right.
The diocese is a custodian trustee in those situations. And
yes, so the PCC is the beneficial owner and a sort of managing trustee. As you say, the diocese would be a custodian trustee holding the legal title.
And it does give us a way of ensuring PCCs don't just give away the family silver. You'd be amazed at the stories that may have happened in the past. So, how are PCCs governed and regulated then?
Well, I think the key point is that all PCCs are charities, which means that PCC members are charity trustees, and they must comply with all the duties that attach to that role. And of course, PCCs are a means in which people can sort of fall into charity trustee status because they haven't necessarily gone through a recruitment exercise labelled as a charity looking for a trustee, but they do become a charity trustee when they stand for election as a PCC member or church warden, or indeed if they are a clergy person and they become trustee that way. The PCCs are only required to register with the Charity Commission and then submit their annual filings to them once their income exceeds £100,000 per annum. But PCCs of all sizes are subject to the regulatory jurisdiction of the Charity Commission and the High Court. So it's just a question of whether you have to register, not whether you are regulated by them. So unlike most charities which have a single governing document setting out their purposes and how they are to operate, PCCs are a bit different. They're created by statute, and their constitution is essentially set out in statute law in two places, really. The Parochial Church Councils Powers Measure of 1956, which deals with their core duties and core purposes, and more familiar to many people, the Church Representation Rules, which deal with the operation of the PCCs, how it is to run elections, hold meetings, etc. And as with other charities, PCCs have to prepare accounts each year, which are either audited or independently examined. They publish their reports to their parish at the APCM, and they must also submit reports to the diocese. And there are some limited powers for the archdeacon or bishop to intervene in cases of difficulty. But really, the primary regulation of PCCs does come from the duties imposed on their members by charity law. So that's the duty to exercise reasonable skill and care, to avoid conflicts of interest, to act in the best interest, to make sure that all property is used for the right purpose, and so on. So it's really charity law that provides the core regulation of PCCs.
And are all parishes governed in the same way? Or rather, perhaps I mean, are all churches governed in the same way through a PCC?
So I suppose one feature of the church representation rules is that there is a common nationwide PCC constitution. So most PCCs are subject to the same rules, and that's useful because there are some good resources available, both on the Church of England website, from the parishresources.org.uk website, and obviously from your own diocese, archdeacon and registrar as well. There is some flexibility within the rules for local preferences. So, for example, the rules allow each parish to decide should our members serve for 3 years or 1 year, should elections involve postal voting or in-person voting, etc. It is possible for a parish to design its own constitution for its parish and its PCC. And that there's a process to go through for that. You need the agreement of the Bishop's Council. It tends to only be done for quite complicated parishes with lots of places of worship, or with different communities that need to be managed together. And that's quite rare in practice, although there are some examples around the country. What's more common are changes made to reflect the wildly different shapes and sizes of parish that we now have. So parishes which have more than one place of worship can form essentially subsidiary bodies known as district church councils to look after each church, which might report into a PCC above them. And at the other end of the scale, parishes can join together with other neighbouring and associated parishes to form joint councils, which allow those joint councils to oversee some or all of the functions of PCCs across multiple parishes. And that can be a solution to simplifying the governance, say, of multi-parish benefices, where parishes have in practice begun to work together and share services anyway. And that's becoming more common, and you'll find probably in most dioceses some examples of that, and that probably will become more common as the sharing of resources and perhaps the sharing of administrative resources and staff becomes more of a sensible route to take us into the future.
Well, thank you, John. I hope that's given people an insight into the basic things around a PCC. We're going to end the recording now, but those of us who are on the call are welcome to stay on for another 10 minutes and ask questions.